Hello, welcome to another episode of Gaius and Grimoire. In this episode, I've decided to do something a little bit different. I don't really have a story to tell, nor is this going to be an opinion piece. Like, I think the last two were more opinion pieces. Or perspective pieces, might be a better word for them. But I've had an idea sort of rattling around in my head, and I haven't been able to put it to use in anything in particular yet. Because it doesn't really fit into any particular game. Like, I can incorporate it into, or elements of it in certain games, but I think it would dilute it a little bit because it is coexisting with other mythoses. And the only way to describe this would be the 1950s atomic monster cover-up conspiracy thing. And that is a long-winded title. So we're just going to call it the Atomic Cover-Up Group, or the Government Cover-Up Group in the 1950s. And it's a lot like what it sounds. It's a game that you would play as government agents, a la Delta Green, X-Files, Task Force Valkyrie, if you know Vampire the Requiem. Or not Vampire the Requiem, Hunter the Vigil. Men in Black is a good example as well. More like the comic Men in Black than the movie Men in Black, but either or. And it's pretty much exactly what it sounds. Because I was sitting, I was thinking about in the early to mid to late 1950s, and I think it spilled over into the 60s a little bit. Might have started earlier in the late 40s. If you count Godzilla, it definitely was in the late 40s. But you have all these atomic monster movies, these giant monster movies that would have giant ants, or a giant Gila monster, or a praying mantis, or spiders just crawling across the landscape, quite literally, like destroying tanks and killing people and ruining the lives of good old southwestern townfolk. And the military gets involved, they kill it another way. But those, theoretically, considering the amount of atomic monsters, could exist in the same universe. Actually, all of those B movies can probably exist in the same universe. So I started thinking of what if the government had a task force, an agency, if you would, that's designed to, if necessary, to combat these critters, but is more focused on arriving in the aftermath, cleaning up the body, basically either paying off, neuralizing, if you want to run it that way, because that's one way to possibly do it, just have them wipe their memory. Although I'm not a big fan of that. Or simply liquidating the witnesses, getting rid of them. And that would come down to how the players decide to play the game, if it ever comes to be, or how I set up the agency in the metagame. Not in the metagame, I mean the background. Because I can have this government agency during the early Cold War be all like kittens and rainbows. We're like, we just want to make sure our people don't get eaten by giant atomic chickens that break out of our labs. Or they can just be, you know what, we have to win this war. We'll do it by any means necessary. We can have information getting out about atomic monsters. We can't. And they just kill the witnesses. But this would work for a lot of things. You have as I said, your earlier creatures that would be lower level. If you want to, not really a level like a number, but in terms on the weird shitometer. You have them, the giant ants, Tarantula, the movie Tarantula, the giant Gila monster, and then the higher end of that, you can get like the beast from 20,000 Fathoms, like a giant ancient dinosaur that was living in Antarctica. And that would just sort of be like those things you could probably kill. I mean, with the insects, they tend to give them they tend to provide them with some kind of dermal armor. Like their little armor, the exoskeleton is now like much tougher. But that's pretty much your run of the mill atomic B movie. Atomic test, ants, Gila monsters, what have you, grow to giant size, and then they get hungry. But there's more you could do with that. If you want to go up to the point where you just can kill your players more easily. Actually, no, that would be the last one. If you want to get to the really crazy end of that, the giant claw. The giant claw. Look that up. I'm not going to even tell you what it is. The giant. Actually, I am going to tell you what it is. Because then, what's the point of just telling you to look something up in a podcast? The giant claw was a 1950s movie, literally about a giant bird of prey. It's a puppet. It looks hideous. Not in the monster hideous way, like the puppet hideous way. Let's just say it's a bird big enough to eat planes whole. And throughout the movie, they refer to it as a flying battleship, even though not a flying battleship, the giant bird. And according to the trailer, you can look up the trailer. I'm pretty sure it says like it's immune to firearms and it's this and that. And I don't think it's an atomic monster. If I remember correctly, it's an alien. So you get this weird angle where you have to come up with a way for your task force to either kill, or as I said, probably on the later end of that, clean up a giant alien bird and convince everyone who saw it it's not there. And then you have, again, sort of going into the aliens a little bit more, you have Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The idea of people being replaced and with pod people. That might be a more direct threat. Rather than just the cleanup. You go into an area where you think the crisis is over. Because if you remember the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it ends with, the pods spilled all over the road. You clean that up. You convince people those pods aren't there. You go back into the town a little bit. Maybe someone gets out. Maybe a pod fell off the bridge or the highway, whatever it was on, and landed in the water and went down into the river or whatever the hell was underneath them. Or fell into the alleyway and opened up, and this pod person was able to continue the alien species. And now not only does your team now have to deal with more pod people, they have to keep pod people from getting out. I mean, the word regarding the pod people from getting out. And then you have the two things that I think if you want to kill your players, like put your players in a situation where they have to prepare like another character sheet for another agent if things go south. Because that's like, real quick, that's probably the good thing about playing a government agency. When in any regard, when you're going after the critters, whether it's Delta Green or I guess isn't there an X-Files role-playing game, but especially Delta Green, and if you play like Task Force Valkyrie in Hundreds of Vigil, when you die, when you're assimilated by the alien, or if you're eaten by the spawn of Cthulhu, or if you go crazy from the Great Race of Biff, you can now get like a new agent. Like, oh, this guy was waiting on the bench. Boom. So, that's the thing. The last two I would say, and I would not throw these at these guys unless you've seen roleplay-wise that they are capable of making rational decisions, their characters, that they can play their characters seriously enough not to just, and then they die and they're like, oh, we're dead. But, I mean, they would have to play professionals, if you know what I mean by that. They would have to play professionals and be good at their job. So they can't just be dumb luck. And that would be the Blob. And since the original Thing from Another World came out in 1951, you could technically have them fight the John Carpenter version of the Thing. Considering they're pretty much the same. But just imagine being sent to clean up an operation in Antarctica. You spend most of your game in the Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada desert smoking atomic monsters and cleaning up their remains. And maybe you've gone out and stopped the pod people. And maybe you were there to clean up the body of the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. And maybe you've, eliminated a cult that was worshipping the giant claw or something like that. You can come up with endless amount of stories. It doesn't even have to be. It's really centered around the 1950s atomic critters and the aliens of the day of the B movies. But you could stretch that in any direction, B movie wise, theoretically. You could have them fight the creature from the Black Lagoon. You could have them fight Frankenstein. So you could take the stranger things that you could think of, throw it into this 1950s setting, and sort of play out these conspiracy, government cover-up sort of game. But it's not a hunter game. You're not going out to fight these creatures. You're more preserving the status quo rather than continually going out and hunting the aliens or hunting the atomic monsters. You're merely the cleanup crew. So, because a lot of these things, because the basis is the atomic monsters, the governments end up creating these things inadvertently. So, and it's just the task force that deals with the giant ants and the giant spiders also works really well when fighting the aliens or the other monsters. Or, you could take it in a direction that they might not expect. But it's just sort of this 1950s cover-up setting. You could probably take it global if you really wanted to. Because I'm trying to think of any foreign movies of the 1950s or that have a similar feel. Theoretically, you could take the Japanese kaiju genre, and the U.S. probably working with those locals to sort of cover up the monsters. You could take the monster. I think is Monster Island in Godzilla? Because I know there's a Monster Island in Marvel Comics. I don't know if I'm confusing the two. But taking it to the source. So you can sort of get creative if you want to play around in this setting. And again, I haven't sold it to a system. I mean, I could see how it could work using the basic role-playing system. I could see how it could work in Call of Cthulhu, because, it's very similar to Delta Green. But so if you like how this sounds, or you think you could take some of the basics of this and put another spin on it, go for it. I'm still trying to figure out if I would even play it. This is just sort of a dream that I have and an idea that I'd like to play. I might do this in the future. I might go down my top 7 or top 5 franchises that I'd like to roleplay. That might be my next episode. But really, the idea of these playing these sort of 1950s G-men or Men in Black, just going around cleaning up after these atomic monsters, is very interesting to me, considering how many of them are out there in terms of media, and how the 50s had a lot of this science fiction that really works well for the cover-up, especially if you put them all in the same universe. Um, if I decide to do anything with this, I'll keep you updated if you're interested. Alright, we can edit that cough out. But I can keep you up to date if I decide to put this to a system and if I begin to homebrew it in any way. But yeah, that's my concept for a 1950s atomic monster cover-up group, where your players are agents of the government, where you go out and you make sure the Soviets and the Reds don't hear about the fact that a giant atomic Gila monster broke 3 towns in Arizona. Now for the comment question. Now let's go brutally honest with this one. This idea appeal to you in any way? Do you like it? Do you outright hate it? I guess a big problem with that question is I didn't give it a system. But it just has a basic premise for a role-playing game. How does it sound? Just put that in the comments. And next episode, we'll get it'll probably top 5. Get my top 5 role-play franchises I would like to have a tabletop version of. Alright? Good night, and thanks for watching.